Understanding the theory side of JavaScript is really important, and we'll get to this very soon. But there is nothing like seeing exactly what it can do right in front of you. To see some of the things JavaScript can do, we're going to open up a web page, and here I'm on the Mozilla Developer Network. This is developer.mozilla.org. This will also work on any other web page, so you can choose a different one if you would like to. I'm now going to show you how JavaScript can be used to control and make changes to any website. Now, just a quick word before we get any further in this video. There may be one or two things which look complex or unfamiliar, so if you're not used to coding or JavaScript, some of this may look a little bit intimidating, but just be aware that this is just to give you some guides on what JavaScript can do. We don't expect you to remember any of this, and we will cover everything we've been through as we progress through the course. Think of this as a little taster to get you excited with what JavaScript can do to a web page. So to see what JavaScript can do, I'm going to open up the developer tools inside of Google Chrome, which is right click and then go down to inspect. And let's just make this a little bit bigger so it's more visible. And if you are using a different browser such as Safari or Firefox or Edge, most of the developer tools are very similar. So you should be fine if you want to use a different browser too, but if you want things exactly the same, I would follow along with Google Chrome. The first thing we'll see here is this Elements tab, which has access to all of the HTML structure which makes up this web page. We can either hover over any of these lines of code and it will highlight over on the left which section we are currently working on, or we could also click on this arrow, which is the inspector, and select any one of these sections or elements on the page. For example, let's go for this level 1 heading and click on this. This will instantly highlight this level 1 heading inside the code. And when it's selected, you will notice over on the right, we'll have this equals $0. And then we see this pop up just below, which says use $0 inside the console to refer to this element. So we can use $0 inside of this console tab to select any one of our elements or sections, and then we can apply some JavaScript. First of all, let's just confirm we have the right element selected with $0, and then we get back our level 1 heading. So we have selected this element, but what can we do with it? Well, the list is huge and we're only going to scratch the surface here, and we will cover a lot more during this course. If we again select $0 to point to our level 1 heading, and then a dot, we can see below we have access to lots of different options which we can use on this element. A common one which we will use plenty in this course is something called inner text. Inner text is a way to simply change the contents in between the opening and the closing tag. Here we have this text of resources for developers, and if we want to, we can set this equal to any new string of text. So open up the quotations, we can use single quotations or double, either one is fine. And then we can set this text to be anything else which we want to. So let's go for I have changed. And then immediately we get back the newly returned text in the console, and we can also see the web page has updated too. So before we go any further, don't worry about doing any of these changes. This is not updating the live website. This is only inside of our own browser. All we need to do is to simply refresh the browser, and this will be reinstated back to the original version. Also, with doing this, we now reset our $0, and this will now return undefined. We will look at undefined in more detail throughout this course, but for now we can think of it as simply no element has been assigned to this $0. Just like before, we need to go back into the Elements tab to select any one of these sections or elements which we want to work with. Let's go for one of these links up at the top. Again, use the arrow and we can hover over any one of these buttons. Click on this. So we have this button with the ID of feedback button, which should now be assigned to $0. So let's select this and we see our button is now returned. So again, $0 and then the dot will give us access to a range of features which we can apply to this element. One of those is the style property, and from here we can also add an additional style property which we want to apply to this particular button. Just like with regular CSS, if you've used CSS in the past, all of the same style properties are available to use inside the console. An example for this could be the text color, which we can set to any value, which is a valid CSS color. Hit enter, and there we go, this immediately updates inside the browser. Press up, and we can also add a second property, and let's go for the font family. And again, we can change this inside the quotes to be a different font family of cursive. And as expected, this will automatically update the browser. Just one thing to note when working with styles is here we see we have the color property set to hot pink, and this works just like a regular style sheet. However though, when we have two words such as font and family, in regular CSS we would keep this all lowercase and separate this with a hyphen. So we'll write it like this as two words with the dash inside. But instead, when using JavaScript, if we have two or more words, we need to change this into what is called camel case. And each word after the first one begins with a capital letter. So that's pretty much the only thing you need to remember at this stage. We have access to all of the same CSS properties, but we need to type these out as camel case when using JavaScript. And another thing we're going to now look at is events. Again, we have a dedicated event section later on in the course, but for now I just want to get you a little bit excited about what JavaScript can do when interacting with the user. To see an example of this, we can ask the browser to listen out for a mouse event, such as when a mouse hovers over this particular element. We can again do this by selecting our button with $0, and then we can use an event called onMouseOver. So this will detect when the mouse hovers over this particular element, and then we're going to trigger what is called a function. A function is kind of like a task which is going to run when the mouse hovers over this particular button. So don't worry if this looks unfamiliar. We have a lot more detail on functions coming up, but for now all we're going to do is to select this particular element, again access the style property, and this time let's go for the background to be equal to any color, such as orange. Hit enter, and this mouse over event will now be activated. So if we now put the mouse over this particular element, the background is now changed to be orange. This is a way to quickly test things out in the browser, but when it comes to writing real JavaScript code inside of our text editor, $0 won't work. $0 only works inside the browser's developer tools. So instead we need a way to access any of these elements on the page from the outside. For example, back over to the elements page, and what we're going to do is to select a different section. So let's go for the main, which has the ID of content. Of course, we could access $0 since we are in the developer tools, but we need to get used to accessing these elements from a text editor. The way we do this is by starting from the very top level, and this is by accessing the document. We can see straight away that the full page will be highlighted. This is because the document is this actual web page. And then once we've selected the full page just like this, we need a way to filter this page down to the particular element which we want. JavaScript provides us with certain methods which we can use to filter down this page. As we can see here with this autocomplete, we can select an element by the ID, by the class name, and also by the element's name too. But more on these later. I'm going to go for get elements by ID, and then inside of the brackets we can pass in the ID of the element which we want to select. Looking at the elements tab, we see this main section has the ID equal to content as a string. Pass this in. And also note here that this is also camel case too. Just like the font family above, each and every word after the first one begins with a capital letter. Hit enter, and this then returns back our main with the ID of content. So we are in the exact same position as when we use $0. So if we press up and get the same line of code, we can then use dot to access any of the same features which we used before. For example, set the style, and then let's go for the CSS opacity equal to 0.3. This is then applied. We can still do any other thing which you had before, such as the background. We can set this equal to anything. Let's go for red. There we go, the background for the main section has now been transformed to red. And let's just refresh and reinstate this back to its original state. So JavaScript is not limited to only changing the elements in our page. We can also use it to do so much more. We have access to date features, we can access timers, and also some math functionality too. And let's, for example, add up two numbers. We'll say 5 plus 11 is 16. 7 take away 2 is 5. We have loads of other math features too. So we can select the math object and then dot, and then scroll through. We can see we have lots of different options, but a popular one is math.random. Add the brackets just afterwards and hit enter. And this will generate a random number between 0 and 1. And if we keep trying this, we get a different value each time. So this is just a little taste of what JavaScript can do and how we can use it to interact with a web page. And there is so much more to learn, and we'll find out more of these features as we progress through this course.